Now I want to introduce David Rarig, who is building the model in card that was designed by his friend Paul Egri. And I really do appreciate, David, you taking all the time and effort in doing this card modeling. I'm a real advocate about card modeling and the capabilities that this gives model railroaders because it reduces the cost significantly for a lot of structures and it doesn't require a lot of tools. And you can, it's a great way to learn model building, in my opinion, because if you make a mistake, you can easily correct it by just printing out a new copy of whatever you need to redo the model. So Dave, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, good evening, Jim. This is going to be the last session. This is number 5. And Ted, if you're, or Ken rather, if you're ready, you can run that 5th session.
Okay, we're starting on session 5 of Build Along on the Egri engine house. This is the piece that I cut for the flooring. It's a piece of mat board. Notice I cut out clearance and left the tab stick out through the doorway. So what we're going to do is we're going to glue this all together. Got my bottle of tacky glue here and just make a bead along this bottom flange. Takes a little while for the glue to get down here. It is really thick. Okay, here I'm making a bead along this glue tab on the bottom. By the way, I have previously checked to make sure this fits inside of the walls. Okay. Now I just take this and drop it down. Notice the glue tabs at the top have to be spread out a little bit so it fits in. Cut this pretty snug. And it's going to be a tight fit when it gets in here. Okay, there. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to push this in so that the sides are tight against that flooring on both sides. Push it in, press it down, and hold it momentarily while the tacky glue sets.
Dave, is there a reason?
And we want to do the same thing on the end walls. And that will keep everything nice and square. And after this dries and gets set up, I'm going to trim off the excess tabs in the doorways. There's a little bit of a, right here, you can probably see there's a little bit of overlap. I'll just trim that out of there so that all you see is the edge of the cement floor.
Got a question, Jim?
Hey, is there a reason why you raised the floor?
I needed to put something in the bottom to brace it. And
I mean, instead of putting it just at the very bottom of the building, I mean, you raised it up a little bit.
well, I suppose you could, but this way it acts as a brace because those sidewalls go against the floor.
I got you.
Sidewalls.
I got you. Thank you.
If you had it on the bottom there, all you would be relying on is, you know, the sidewall sitting on top of the floor. And trying to get it straight and even and true
Right.
would be a lot more difficult.
Right, gotcha.
These are some of the tricks that I picked up over a few years of modeling, by the way.
And after everything is nice and dry, I'll come back and use my gray marker. And I'll try to get one that's a little bit lighter so it almost matches the color of the base. Now, at this point, if I was going to put tracks in here, I think the way that would work, if you make the floor the right thickness, it's like right at the ties. So I could, and it just so happens it's exactly 9 inches inside. So what I could do here is to actually strip the rail out of a piece of snap track, 9 inch, and epoxy or super glue that to the floor while we're gauging it with a track gauge, which I don't have one because I don't model an HO, so I'm not going to put track in there. But that's the way it could be done if you wanted to have the ability to actually run trains in there. I don't think I would want to try to cut the flooring out to lay the whole track in with the ties and everything. But I think if you had it gauged correctly and connected to tracks on either end, I think if you just epoxy it in place, that would be strong enough to hold it in place. Anyway, now the doors are here. What I did is I cut out the design on the cardstock and I glued it to a piece of chipboard. And this is a 22 ply chipboard, measures 50 thousandths of an inch thick. I bought that again from Dick Blick Art Supplies online, and I wanted to make it so these doors don't buckle or move. I don't know if you can see this here. I had to take a dark gray marker around the edge of the doorway because I found out that when I glued it up inside, if I placed it inside, that that white would show from the card, and I didn't want that to be an issue. So I just colored over it with a gray marker and just make it a narrow bead of glue right along the edges. Doesn't take much. And along the top.
By the way, this tacking glue dries clear. So
And
if
then
it happens to get a little squeeze out, you'll never see it.
And the end behind the opening. And push it in so that it's tight. And that's all there is to the door. I put 2 layers of card together on this louver on the end, and of course drew my edge color in the pen along the side so that it would raise those louvers out, make them stand out a little bit more. All right, now I gotta let that business dry, get firmed up, and then we'll come back to it and make the roof. When we left off the last time, I had just glued the side pieces, braces in place, and the doors. So since the last time, I cut some of these scrap pieces of the heavy card that I had removed from the doorways, and I cut them on a diagonal and then glued them in the corners up to the top, glued them in place with tacky glue to form braces to keep the top structure square. Then what I did is I measured the size of the top, and I'm taking a little different approach on this building than I have on many of my other ones in the past, in that I've cut a sub roof out of a piece of 22 ply chipboard that I found, and then I edged along the ends and the edges with I think this is a white acrylic ink, but it soaks into the card nicely. I'm going to just glue this on top, flush with the sides. The reason I painted it white because I want it to look like a piece of trim along the top of the walls. And I cut out 3 pieces of the roofing. Remember I said about having multiple copies? Okay, well, one of them I scored along the center and folded it into a tent shape. And the other one I scored and folded it the opposite way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to laminate these two together with my glue stick. And then once that's dry, I'm going to place that, glue that down over top of the subwall. And then the final piece here is this. I cut another roof piece. It's a shame Paul didn't make this as a separate drawing item because I wouldn't have had to cut the whole thing. But what it is, I cut this to form the ridge cap. And again, edged along the sides of it with a gray marker so that you don't see the white cut line. So here's the finished model. You can see where I have that white strip along the top there to act as what looks like a trim on the siding. It's actually the subroof. Pretty hard to see on the sides. The 2 roof halves that I glued together with the stick glue did tend to curl, warp a little bit from the moisture, and so I decided that probably I should glue them to the subroof using the same solvent-based contact cement. This is a product made by Beacon, and I bought it from Dick Blick online artist supplies. Kind of expensive, so I only use it sparingly. But it does come in handy for making glue ups that you don't want any warpage. You can see how the bottom of the building looks. You see I have the flooring all installed. It's actually pretty sturdy. Now, if I was going to put this on my layout, which I'm not because my layout is N scale. I think I would look for some detail items to put on. I think it would benefit greatly having something like maybe a light over here over the doorway, maybe lights over the entranceways to the engine house. If you can find the right kind of vents, probably could put some roof vents in, get rid of diesel fumes and such. I wasn't particularly happy with the kind of vents that Paul used. They're from Clever Models, and I've tried putting them together in the past, and I just have a hard time with them. They don't come out square, and I've had a time. So anyway, that's it. You can see how I added the top bridge on the roof. Just give it a little extra bit of detail. So I wish you all success in your builds of this model. Comes out looking pretty decent.
Okay, any questions?
I'm really impressed, Dave. That's an amazing building. One thing I wanted to add to your thought was I have used cyanoacrylate. I'm not awfully fond of epoxy. I get it all over my fingers and all over everywhere, and it's a mess. But cyanoacrylate is good for fixing track to either plastic or wood, I found.
My question I would have with that is it tends to get a little brittle, especially over time.
Mhm.
And it could, that rail could crack loose, which I suppose you could re-glue it, but if you already have the building constructed around it and the roof is on, you're gonna have a hard time getting in there to fix it.
That's a good point.
I think your epoxy tends to stay a little more flexible. Don't forget that you've got a card and paper structure, which tends to have expansion and contraction rates that are different from the rail. So it might be a little better, I would think, using epoxy, but doesn't hurt to try it with something else if you don't like it. I don't like super glue myself, so I prefer to use about anything but.
Now, Dave, you build these card models in N scale for yourself, right?
Oh yeah. And I built an HO, N, O, and I did one in S, a little church. And I've actually printed some up that are very small scale, like, maybe about T scale, 1/450th or something like that. You have to make some adjustments on your paper thickness because you get in the real small ones. You can't print them on heavy paper. It's got to be printed on light stuff.
Yeah. Well, I really do appreciate you doing this. Excuse me, go ahead.
If you wanted to do any weathering, what kind of materials would you use?
Well, I've done it two different ways. I've used the markers, just like those blick markers that I use. You can use those to put streaks on or something like that. But that's a little tough to control because all you do is just touch it and it bleeds all over the place. So my preferred way is to use a powdered pastel, like I think the brand I use a lot is that pan pastel. It's real fine grind and it goes on real easy on the paper, and it's just a little hard to get it off if you get too much on, because once it's there, it's there.
If you were to build that engine house in O scale, what would you do differently especially in terms of bracing?
Well, I might use a thicker material on the walls on the inside. Instead of that heavy card, I'd probably try using maybe a foam board or something like that, that's a 3/16 of an inch thick. I've made some O scale buildings and I've used that foam core in the sides, and that works real well. Either that or maybe like a gator board or something of that nature that's a little more substantial, won't bend as easy.
So what do you use to glue the paper onto the foam board?
Oh, good question. I think I used a solvent base, like that tube stuff I think I used on it. The biggest thing is you don't want a very wet adhesive, like a white glue, because that can make it buckle and a pucker, and that's not good on paper.
Right.
Dave, you model in hand scale like I do. What do you feel about using the card models as not just a background, but in hand scale using it as a more foreground?
Well, let's put it this way, Ken. I built some T-track modules, and all the buildings except one on those T-track modules are made from paper. And I sold those modules to a modeler from Texas, and he likes to take them around and put them in these big train shows. And they actually included them in the NAMRA N-scale super layout that they had at Kansas City a few years back. And a lot of people, I guess, remarked on how good those buildings looked. And, T-track you can get within about 6 inches or so of them if you want to get that close. So I have no problem using them foreground. The only thing that they don't have is the feel, if you will. I mean, if you were to reach out and grab it, of course you can tell there's no texture, it's just flat paper. But they look very convincing in photographs.
Thanks.
Dave, thanks so much again. I really do appreciate it. And
Thank you, Jim.
can't thank you enough for sharing your talent with us.